Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. This week on the show, I'm glad to have Mary and Brian Rooney of BKS Artisan Ales in Brookside, Missouri. They're here to talk about consumer preferences, tinkering with styles, near endless choice, and the regionality of brewing. But first, please go visit allaboutbeer.com for original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Brewer to Brewer and the All About Beer podcast simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. This show and all of the work we do, it's supported by you. And you can help by going and visiting patreon.com/allaboutbeer. There, you can keep the content fresh because a few bucks goes a long way to fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising on this show or any of our shows, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. A few weeks ago, I had the chance to meet and chat with Mary and Brian Rooney. They're the owners of BKS Artisan Ales in Missouri. They were pouring as part of the Little Beers Festival, and we had a lot of fun batting around ideas while I learned about their brewing philosophy and approach to hospitality. They opened BKS in 2017, and the name comes from the commonly used abbreviation of the Brookside neighborhood of Kansas City, where the brewery is located. Mary runs the front of the house, and Brian works in the brewery. And despite what the brewery's full name is, he's also creating a multitude of lagers through his Pivo Project. And we get into that and more. Here's our conversation. When I think about Missouri in general, Kansas City obviously has some great beer traditions in the craft sense, and the state at large has great beer traditions in the large macro sense. And regardless if I'm thinking of Anheuser-Busch or Boulevard, with both of them, I often think about quality, and I think about commitment to styles or to doing what they're doing, regardless of how people might feel about ownership. When you both were thinking about opening up the brewery and being the size that you are, how did the histories of those two brands and the others that came before you and sort of the expectations that drinkers have, how did that play into launching BKS, if at all?
I would say that it did play into it in the sense of those things were really well established, and we were trying to find a different way to carve out a spot for ourselves in Kansas City. So we were, at the time, this is like 2017 when we started, we were pretty inspired by some of the beers that we didn't see in our market, primarily from the West Coast and the East Coast. And we saw an opportunity to kind of carve out a space for ourselves in Kansas City and maybe bring some of those styles of beer to market that really hadn't really been produced in Kansas City. And so we were thinking there was a good opportunity for us to maybe take a run at it and see how the beer drinkers here respond to those sorts of things. And that's really how we ran it. So we weren't trying to necessarily produce beers that the beer drinkers here had already seen, although we had found out in just talking with our friends and with customers that would come in that there still was a desire to see some of that. And so we have kind of start out with a blend of what's more on the cutting edge with like hoppy and stouts, and then also striking a balance with what we saw were some intriguing styles from an English standpoint, as well as we did some early mixed fermentation sort of things. We don't do so much of that anymore. That was kind of how we started out with it. So we were trying to be a little different, trying to bring something to market that maybe beer drinkers around here hadn't quite seen, but really wished was present in the marketplace.
In thinking of 2017, when so much was happening in the beer space, I guess I'm sort of surprised that there wasn't the options that you're talking about, even just 5-6 years ago.
Right. Yeah. So the Midwest, we've kind of, I would say, what we see with beer trends, historically, we had been quite a few years behind what we would see starting out on the coasts.
I would say even Kansas City specifically, because I think some of those are being brewed in like St. Louis or Chicago, but Kansas City, for whatever reason, was a little delayed in getting some of that smaller craft brewery scene in our region.
Do you have any theories as to why?
Well, I think that if you think about the Midwest beer drinker, and in particular, if I'm going to talk about Kansas City, I think beer drinkers were very content with what some of the more established breweries in the region were doing. Very distribution heavy, and I think that was sufficient enough to meet most people's needs with all of that. But there was sort of around that time, I think about a smaller group of beer drinkers that are a little bit more passionate about what's emerging out on the coasts, on the east and the west side, and there was very much an appetite for it. So, but it was a smaller group, so we kind of started down the path with that in the early days.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why Kansas City was delayed. I think it was more of just, maybe some of their bigger metros had more resources or had more investment, but there were small craft breweries. They just weren't necessarily as many.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's just overall a trend that you see. I mean, I'm born and raised in the Midwest, and I've spent a great deal of my time in Kansas City. I did live in Portland, Oregon, and then Denver before moving back to this area and living in Kansas City. And I think it's just it's a recognizable trend where you see a lot of things first take off over to the east or the west, and then it takes a little while to get its way into the Midwest and kind of come into consciousness here. And that's not necessarily just a beer thing. I mean, that could be pretty much anything, food, culinary wise, all that types of stuff.
Yeah. So in thinking about what was happening on the coasts and what you wanted to bring to the beer conversation of Kansas City, where you are now, how does that square with your thoughts back then?
I think we're still a bit the same, but we've evolved. And so when we first came to market, there was like I was saying, there was an opportunity for us to fill what I thought was a void for hazy IPA in Kansas City. And then I also saw some opportunities around some other sessionable styles that weren't really being done. And so we've stayed with that. I mean, hazy IPA is probably 75% of what we sell, and it's a strong selling segment for us for sure. And as time has gone on, and I'm happy about this, I've seen trends with West Coast IPA coming back, trends with lager becoming more prominent, and I've seen our Kansas City beer drinkers' sentiments and considerations around those styles increasing. And so we've been brewing more and more and more of those styles, and I'm surprised by it that how quickly it's changing. So change back like in 2016, 2017, like I said, it might take 3-5 years for trends to arrive where we are at now. Things, it seems like, especially after pandemic, are almost occurring as quickly as they're happening out on the coast. And so we've just seen this rapid sort of return to traditional and classic lager styles, also some more modernized versions of it, which we're very much into. And then the West Coast IPA has come back in a pretty strong way, but with a little bit more of a modern, different edge to it. And the consumers around here, the beer drinkers around here, are really into it. So we have seen hazy IPA for us on draft. It would sell like 3-1 almost over everything else we would have in our tasting room. And now Lager will go 1-to-1 with that on draft. We'll sell as much lager in a weekend as we will hazy IPA or West Coast IPA. And I think that's great. I mean, that's really showing, in my opinion, a maturing craft beer scene. Like, American craft beer drinking scene is very, very young overall. And I think you're starting to see people's palates and understanding of what quality is and why it's interesting and fun to try more than just one or two styles. And you're seeing a return sort of to more classic and traditional, but also just modernized versions of those. And I think that just shows how things have evolved and matured with our beer scene in Kansas City.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mary, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think on draft, we see that. I think in a to-go format,
it's different.
But
how so?
Definitely the IPAs, specifically hazy IPAs, sell way faster than our sessionable, or lager styles. So it's definitely the
the 4-pack of haze is still kind of controlling that conversation, running that conversation
from a number, like quantity perspective. Somebody's going to come in and maybe buy a flat of hazy IPAs. If we have multiple of them, very rarely do I see somebody come in and buy a flat of lager.
But they'll put a 4-pack of lager.
Sure, they'll put one in there,
where they might not.
Sure, little palate cleanser. Yeah,
and it is. Yeah, you got to have that. It's interesting with to go versus on premise. So it's the weirdest thing. And I know we're not the only brewery that's noticed this. I've talked to plenty that have said the same thing. So if we put like a hazy double IPA on tap, it doesn't sell as good as the lager or maybe the West Coast IPA or the hazy IPA that's on tap. But the hazy double IPA will be the number one selling SKU to go that week when we have it out in cans. And so I think maybe our theory on this is that, certainly around here, everybody has nice, expansive backyards, and they like having beers at home. We're not in like really cramped sort of like urban section of like a bigger city. And so people can drive their cars and pick stuff up and take it home or have a barbecue in their backyard. Yeah. And so, you can only have so many double IPAs in a tasting room setting. You're probably more inclined to have a couple more of those in your own backyard where you're just staying home. So maybe I don't know. I try to think about why is that happening? Because it's just two distinct sort of trends on to go versus draft consideration for beers.
You've had the benefit of being open before the pandemic began in earnest, and seeing sort of some of the consumer trends before that versus now. And I mean, the drinking at home sort of makes sense. Of people have kind of gotten used to it, and they like the comfort of their home, but they want to be able to drink what they want to. Has there been a shift of the beers that you were making for the at-home consumption over the last, like, pre and post pandemic, or pre and during?
I would say not intentionally so.
Okay.
So pre-pandemic, we had a little bit of a different lineup than what we do today. Like I said, we were brewing some like mixed fermentation, fruited sour sort of stuff, and then we kind of ceased that. And when we went into pandemic, we pretty much just took with us the IPA segment of what it is that we brew, because that's what people wanted most of. And our tasting room wasn't open at all. We were shut down for more than a year.
Yeah.
And so we were producing just new cans of different IPAs nonstop for like a year. And every once in a while, infusing a lager into there or one of our English styles. Yeah. But we had to, that was our lifeblood. We didn't have any other way to make money. And that was what the greatest demand was just IPA. But as we've come out of pandemic, I think that we have changed quite a bit about how what we're interested in brewing and what we're interested in sharing with people that come into our tasting room. We're not going to abandon how we brew IPA. That's still, of course, a strong piece for what we do. But because we were making so much hoppy stuff, we kind of got interested in, the other things that are not hoppy, and we really wanted those to return to our tasting room. And so we've really delved more into like English style, certainly into lager in a much bigger way, and a lot of different styles. And then revisiting some classics too, like just classic American, like pub types of beers that, maybe we wouldn't have done a couple of years ago. But it's because we have a fascination of like wanting to drink and experience those, because I didn't get burned out on IPAs, but a year and a half straight of drinking those, you'll look for something else.
Yeah, that's what I think we grew. So before 2019, like from 2017 to 2019, we were maybe making 500 barrels a year.
Mhm.
Now we're at 1,200 barrels a year. So that also enabled us to expand what we're brewing. And our model is, we have a lot of small fermenters, so we can make so many different styles. We're not making just one big batch. We're making, 4 different batches a week, 4 or 5 different batches. So that allows us to do that, where we can still make our IPAs at the pace we were making them before, but now we can work in those different styles that Brian was mentioning in some other tanks. So
yeah,
I think what's changed is maybe some consumer behaviors, but also we've changed as a brewery of how much we're making, our size, our capacity to serve the customer. There's a few things that have changed, not just with the customer.
And we were, I would say, in those first few years, we were really focused on a specific segment of craft beer drinker and trying to attract their attention. People that were into hazy beer, who were into maybe some adjuncted stout types of things. Those were the things that were able to get quick attention and get people to come into your tasting room.
Oh, sure.
And then, but we still always had a commitment to sessionable beer behind it. And I think that that's the thing that also grew, is that as people tried those beers and began to trust how we were brewing those and appreciating the quality of it, they were more apt to visit some of these styles they might not normally consider. And then I think that they have, kind of created their own following, because people had the option of like, well, I'll give this a try. I like your other beers that are the ones that I'm here for. And then they try those, and then they've come back year after year to buy those, and have kind of, I would say, it's kind of like a little bit of a habitual sort of thing. It's like you come in and you're going to have the hazy beer, but then you'll go with our English mild after that. You want to get into something more sessionable, and people are staying in the tasting room longer than they used to, which is great too. It's because there are more sessionable offerings rather than just, higher ABV sorts of things. And so I love seeing that. I think that's really indicative of a healthy tasting room, is you have a diverse beer lineup, but the consumers that are coming in trust you enough that they'll try some things that are maybe not normally in their wheelhouse or what they're comfortable ordering, and then they enjoy it. And I think that all fits into the whole evolution of what's going on with beer in Kansas City and Midwest beer drinkers.
Well, I think it's also cool to see like a family come in, and we have something that we can kind of, like maybe there's a, obviously all drinking age family, but even
full disclaimer. Yeah.
We can find something that everybody likes, so that, we kind of have a range of styles and within limitation. We don't have, we don't typically only have about 9 beers on tap. Versus I know a lot of tap rooms have, up to 20 or more. We don't have the space for more than 9, but we can still within that 9 usually find something that everyone likes. So that's kind of a cool thing where, like Brian was saying, we have more the traditional style that maybe somebody likes, a wheat beer, but then we still have the hazy IPA or the West Coast IPA, kind of a range of things that usually somebody will find their style of beer.
Yeah. I dig that. I wonder how, if you've had the conversation with folks. We were talking about this a little bit at Little Beers down in Georgia with West Coast IPA, or I think we were. At least it was a late night. There's been a lot of conversation about West Coast IPAs gaining popularity again. Among new drinkers or drinkers that came up only in the age of haze, and then some of the older drinkers as well who are looking for nostalgia or hoppy bitterness and something that's a little bit more bracing. When you're in the tap room and you're seeing some of the West Coasts that you're doing, do you find that people can jump from haze to clear, from juicy to bitter, or vice versa? And if so, how are you having that conversation with folks, or what are they saying when they're jumping back and forth?
Mary, you probably know that best because I don't spend as much time serving beer as I used to. But I will say what I've observed is we'll still have somebody, the first beer they come in and they order a hazy IPA, and then I've really quickly noticed that the next one they're ordering is usually like a West Coast. And so it seems like people start with a little bit more residual body in their hoppy beer choice, and then start choosing drier and more sessionable beers as the day goes on, if you're going to have more than one. But it's interesting. I've also, just my observations of beer trends in general regarding hazy IPA and West Coast is I'm kind of seeing like a change in hazy IPA or hazy beer altogether. Like it seems to be two factions of it, maybe. Like where I'm seeing like the East Coast interpretation of it seems to have a little more residual body. The turbidity is higher. Maybe there's some more residual sweetness that's in that. And then on the West Coast, you see like what's referred to as like hazy West Coast IPA, or New England styles that are brewed with a much drier perception to it and maybe a little more elevated bitterness. And I think that where our beer sits is we're somewhere in between that. We don't have an overly sweet one or anything like that. But I see the beer trends with hazy beer really sort of it's leaning into a little bit drier territory lately. And I think that's great. It just means there's more drinkability to it. Mary, you probably talk to people like what their preferences are once they come in the tasting room, like what you see.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely certain people who only stick with the haze. That's just the style they like, and that's what they want. But definitely seeing more and more interest in the West Coast. And I would say the way we make the West Coast style isn't super bitter. There's a hint of bitterness. It is very clean, drier finish, but it isn't the as bitter and malty as a lot of people when they hear old school West style. We're not really making like that type of old school West style, so it's a little more approachable, I think, for some people who are looking to find an alternative to the haze. And I also have heard people who are just I don't want hazy beer right now. I'm kind of want something when it's hot out, or maybe just their mood, they just don't want it. They would prefer the more cleaner West Coast.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I do see people kind of shift from both, kind of going back and forth.
And it's perhaps the future of IPA as we know it is, there's a place for all of it. And I think that there's just been such wild interest in the hazy style for like the last 7 years. And like everything with those trends, the weight of all that interest ends up crushing itself at some point. You're as that style has been brewed by almost every brewery out there I visit, like it's on draft. Like just 5 years ago, a lot of places didn't have it, or didn't know how to execute it. But as more information has become available, more people are doing it. But it's a style that's brought in new beer drinkers, into hoppy beer categories that they might not have liked IPA. Then they had the hazy beer and they gave hops a chance. And then now they're opening up to going back to West Coast IPA. So I see it as a great segment for us to brew beer in, but definitely, there's going to be a place for all of it, I think, and a place for between type of styles. We forever wanted to call those Midwest style IPAs, but that never seems to catch on. So
yeah,
stay tuned there.
Yeah, the one that I've kind of been surprised about is we make we call it a West Coast Pale Ale, but it's Brian probably can tell exactly what it is, but it's more of a 5% pale ale that has a little more hops to it. It's clear. And that's been super popular on tap, especially on tap. I think to go as well, but really people come in, it's got a great flavor profile, got a little bit of hop profile, but it's super sessionable.
Yeah, older school, like C hops that are involved in it, but a softer bitterness, but punchier sort of hop nose to it. And that's been a great one. I was not so sure how people would respond to that here. And like Mary said, it's great to see those sorts of things. So we're just seeing, like I said, overall, a lot of people are looking for new experiences with beer. And I think that's kind of where we fit into the picture, certainly in Kansas City, and maybe people that are visiting Kansas City. You come into our tasting room, we have almost a whole set of new beers almost every week, because we have 19 fermenters ranging from size of 5 barrel to 10 barrel. This is 19 of them, and in those fermenters there's 19 different beers at any given time. They're never the same ones that are in there. So we're bringing out new SKUs like every week. It's 4 or 5 quote unquote new beers. It might be a beer we haven't brewed in eight months or so, but we work it into the rotation where it's maybe it has a variation on it, or it's just something you haven't seen in a long time. But when you come in, it's kind of a new experience, but something familiar that
As a brewer, how are you keeping up with that?
It's I don't get a day off from thinking about it, I would say. We have to stay really organized around all of that. And I've had friends from other breweries that visit, and when they start to get the picture of how many fermenters that is, and then we have 7 bright tanks also. It gives us a lot of options to work with, but it is chaotic. So we have to stay very organized. We do have software that helps us manage it, which has been incredibly helpful. And Mary's been really good with that. She knows how to work the Airtable stuff. I don't know what I'd do without it. But I spend most of my early part of the week tasking out everything for the 3 full-timers that work with us on the brewing side. And it's like every week it's going through thinking about what are their individual tasks that they need to do in reference to where we need to drive all of these beers to. And I love it. I love having the challenge of, it's almost like we're a pub brewery, but at like a very intense scale. And I think that's fun and challenging. And I think I would be a little bit sort of bored with the process if we started just brewing the same beers over and over again.
So, I mean, I'm sort of stuck on that 19 number, which is just, I mean, it's a lot of fun, but so walk me through your creativity process of when you're trying to, you mentioned early on in this conversation, modern twists on classics. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if there's an example of a beer or two that either you have on or that you've done recently that are good examples of that, and maybe sort of how those beers come together in your mind and execution?
Yeah, I two examples of that. I think so. To think about our brewery, we have one side is where all of our lagers are done, and we kind of have this side brand that we've named it Pivo Project by BKS Artisan Ales, and that's where all of our lager is fermented and lagered at. And then we have all of our ales side, like the BKS Artisan Ales, is all on the other side of the brewery. So we kind of keep those endeavors separate, and we have to put on like a different way of thinking about what our brew day is, what our cellaring is. Like, so I like the idea of segmenting ales from lagers because they are two very different approaches for brewing and fermenting, and then also how we treat them up to the packaging process. And so when you compartmentalize, so we have 7 lager tanks and or 7 lager fermenters, and then we have 2 lagering vessels. And so all of our lager goes out of those tanks, and then we bring them over to our packaging side once they're lagered out and ready to go. But we have done this beer. It's basically a dry hopped modern Pilsner. And we've done it a couple different ways. We've taken traditional like Czech style pills, like Bohemian pills, and then introduced along with like Czech Saaz hops on the hot side. We'll in the whirlpool we'll infuse in things like Mosaic or Nelson Sauvin or Hallertau Blanc, more modern German aroma variety there. We'll spin some of those in, and then we'll dry hop with those a little bit. So we're taking influences of almost like what an Italian style Pilsner is, but then we're modernizing the hop with like Pacific Northwest and New Zealand, and trying to give this more modern take to the idea of like what it's Czech influenced from the base, but then it turns distinctly American with the blend that we're putting into it. And then sometimes we'll play around with some German lager yeast and do the same concept, but we call it a dry hop modern pils, and it's 5.25%. I'm really into those because it's how I want to drink hops now. I'm 45 years old. I can't drink 8% ABV.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, so yeah. And it's fun for me because it's a really clean backdrop to showcase these different lots of hops that we're getting, because we put a lot of love and care into how we select those and wanting to showcase them in a fun way for our customers that come in. And so we're having a blast making those beers on the ale side. And I think maybe I gave you one of these beers when we were in Georgia for the Little Beer Fest, and it wasn't one of the ones we poured. It was just some beers I brought, but it was it's an unfiltered cold IPA. And the idea is kind of taking the concept of the cold IPA, but introducing it in an unfiltered format. And we built the base out with that with German Pilsner malt, and then flaked rice and a little bit of corn. And then we approached the dry hop like you almost would like a West Coast IPA. I think that one was Mosaic and Amarillo that was in there. And that's when I learned you didn't like Mosaic, right?
Yeah, no, I can't stand Mosaic.
I love Mosaic.
I like certain Mosaic. I like old school school Mosaic.
Like the blueberry.
Yeah, like the very, yeah. And it's so hard to find those lots these days. But yeah.
Yeah. Everything's gone a lot more like diesel-y,
yes.
sort of
it's the caddy thing for me that I just can't.
Yeah, and I love that too. I love both of those.
And listen, I'm firmly in the minority of this, and I understand that. Like Mosaic has just washed over the country, and palates are in love with it, and I can appreciate it for what it is. And when I'm tasting the beers in it, I will look past my own dislike to see the merits of a finished beer. But it's not something that in social drinking situations that I actively reach for.
Yeah, it is interesting how we've seen Mosaic in general is now seemingly taking a lot of lead interest on West Coast IPA, and I'm surprised by that. I just would always feel like it would be more C hop driven, like your Cascade, Centennial, Chinook, Columbus sort of things would always have the and still do have a place there, but you're seeing this mosaic, and then like strata has certainly made its way in there a lot more. But yeah, so that's kind of like when we talk about a modern take on those sorts of things, I think that's the fun thing, is like, what can we do that's already been done, but it's a little bit different and draws on some of our influences and interests that we have at the moment, and how can we do something a little different without being obnoxious about it. We want the beer still to stand up and have something behind it that you recognize, like, yes, I understand where this is coming from, and it is modernized because of these specific hops that are used in there. It's just a different sort of take with it.
And I think the number of fermenters we have and the size of fermenters we have allow us to do some of that experimentation, because we can do a little smaller batch, try it out, see if we like it, and then we can repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
Or what I've also seen is like, we'll try it one time. We're like, we really, really could improve on that. So then next time we make it, it's just like, okay, well, this is what we're looking for. So it just takes a few rounds of maybe brewing a more traditional style, and how do we kind of just tweak it slightly enough that it's uniquely our own.
Yeah, and it's bending an ear towards, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out like what's interesting that's being brewed or produced that's out there that I haven't been able to try. And if I can read up on a little bit, maybe it seems intriguing and I'll give it a shot. Like, so I was reading about British style golden ale and what that is. And all I could do is imagine how it must taste. And so that's been one that we've made a few times and have loved it. And it's kind of a modernized sort of like, it's not like I wouldn't call it like a modern English pale ale, and I certainly wouldn't call it like a modern bitter, but it's somewhere in that realm. And so you're using like East Kent Goldings, but then some modern hops, like we use Cascade in it. And in fact, at Little Beer Fest, we did a collab a couple weeks before with Goodword, and we did a modern English pale ale. It was kind of like an idea around that British style golden ale, where I was talking with them about just infusing some modern hops into this classic English pale ale base, and it worked wonderfully with it. And I think that's when we're talking about modernizing, it's just thinking, what else can we do on top of what we already know that will really be characterful and balanced. And what I mean by balance is that it's not, it doesn't lean too hard to one side or another. It's got like some symbiotic relationship that the Cascade we put in there works overall with everything else.
I get the impression that you have a healthy respect for tradition, but you don't like being hamstrung by styles or what people think styles are.
I would say that's fair. And I think that just comes from where my own curiosity around beer is. I do have a very healthy respect for classic styles, and we do classic styles, and I aspire to always execute those in the best possible way that we can, paying tribute to those styles that I love drinking. But I think that beer drinkers in general that we see coming through the tasting room, everybody loves to try what's new. And in fact, that's kind of, we hear that all the time, or what's the new thing? And for better or for worse, like I said, I like having 19 fermenters and managing that, and it's fun. But then I'm also envious when I see people that have a flagship that they can make over and over again. But I think that where we've taken people's consideration for their visit to our tasting room is they expect us to have something new. And so it's a good creative process to kind of sit there with our team and come up with like, what can we do here? Or we've got, these lager fermenters opening up in a couple weeks. What's something that we're interested in that we can try and pull off that's a little bit different, but still paying homage to, some classical base behind it, and so that's kind of where we start with it.
I dig that. Mary, you spend a lot of time in the tasting room. it is mostly people asking for what's new. Are you starting to see folks, or are there folks who say, like, if something comes on and then is quickly replaced by something that was on one of the 19 fermenters, are there people who are starting to long for regular beers on tap?
Yeah, I think there's two customer bases that we kind of see, and maybe Brian kind of sort of touched on it. We see the customer that wants what's the newest option, and then we have the customer who come in and wants our Rock Hill and Locust English mild ale. They want that on tap every time they come in. So we try to do our best. It doesn't always work, but we try to have something that is somewhat consistently on tap, or at least in a certain style element. So yeah, I definitely hear people like, oh, I really wanted to try that one, or I wish you'd bring this one back. That was a great lager or whatever. So I think we have a little bit of both. And even within could be the same person that wants to come in and always have one beer that they know and love, and then they want to try maybe their second beer or something new. But we see that, and we have gotten a few of our brands that people know. And so like Counterculture is our most brewed and well-known hazy IPA. So when we have that one, which we don't always have, it sells out very quickly because people know it and want it, and they see it in the to-go option, and they're like, I'm going to grab that because I know I've had it before. I know I like it. But then you get the person that comes in and, hey, this is the new release this week. We've never done it before, and they want that one. So we kind of see a little bit of a cross segment. People wanting something that they feel comfortable with, but also those who are always looking for the newest and greatest.
There's an interesting thing in the tasting room that I've seen is if you have 2 or 3 hazy IPAs on, consumers can sometimes be confused about it. Like, I think the people that are big fans of what we do, they understand what the nuances in the dry hop are that are different. But then, if my dad came in and had one of those beers, which he would not choose a hazy IPA, but if he did, he wouldn't know the difference between those 3. And like, why are there 3 of these and the difference? And so what we've learned over time is that it's better to just have a few distinctly different beers than it is to have a lot of certain styles and have a bunch of taps. It's overwhelming for people to come into and make a decision. And so they can try a hazy IPA. It's whatever the new one is that we have, and they're like, oh, that's good. I like that. And then they'll go over to the fridge to take some to-go 4-packs home, and they might pick some different hazy IPAs that are in can format to take with them. But I think that's also goes with lager. Like, I can't put a dry hop lager on, like I was saying, like we'll do a modern dry hop pills and then have a West Coast IPA right next to it. That becomes confusing for a lot of customers as well. They're like, well, what's the difference? These are both hoppy, and maybe there's some differences in bitterness and malt character that a more advanced or astute palate would understand. But so we're trying to balance, like, when I'm going to have a dry hop modern pills, I'm probably not going to have the West Coast IPA on. And so we're just trying to curate the menu. So as you get through it, there's these distinct little things that are unique and interesting for each beer that you try. And certainly with stouts, we've realized this. We used to do a lot more adjunct types of stouts. And when I mean adjunct, I'm talking about like coffee, vanilla, cacao nib, things like that. I mean, we weren't putting like cereal and things like that into the beers. But what we've come to find out is now we're really just making like a really basic oatmeal stout that we love, and we put it on nitro, and that scratches the stout itch for people that are into it. And it's a lovely beer, and it's low ABV. And same thing, like we might do a milk stout that's sessionable. It's like 5.6% ABV, and it's just going to have vanilla in it or cacao nib. And that's sufficient. We don't have to have like all these different options with tons of things in them, and so it works really well for our small brewery, and it definitely provides people the lineup of beer that they're looking for when they come in.
I dig that. Mindful of your time, I wanted to ask you each the green door question. So you're under no obligation to answer together or to include each other, obviously, even though you're sitting next to each other. But the green door question, if you're not familiar, is in the last season of The Good Place, they introduce a concept of a green door that you can walk through and be anywhere, doing whatever you want to do in your wildest imaginations. So if we had a green door on our plane of existence and this conversation ended and you could walk through it and be in any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like to be drinking? And Brian, I'll start with you.
All right. Well, I know that right away because I've been asked that question before. And up until I was just in Georgia, I'd never been to the Brick Store pub before. And so maybe that would be my answer now. Did
I ask you this question?
No, you didn't. I'd never been there before, but I've had somebody like, if you could have any beer,
Oh, okay.
Or
I'm like, who's stealing my shit?
No,
that I stole from The Good Place. Yeah.
Yeah. Or somebody asked like, what's your favorite place if you could go have a beer at?
Yeah.
I would tell you some places, but I had a fantastic experience there before we got on our flight and went home. I was like, I'm coming back to this place.
Yeah,
but I would say I had an amazing like IPA epiphany at Pizza Port Ocean Beach a long time ago. God, it must have been 2012. And there was John, you're gonna hate this. It was an all mosaic West Coast IPA.
That's fine. This is your story. I'm not trying.
Yeah. I tell anybody I like mosaic. So I would be there and I would have the beer. I think it was called Foxtrot was the name of it. I don't know if they make it anymore, and I haven't been back to San Diego in forever, but I need to go visit some friends there. But I would be there, and of course Mary would be with me, and I'd get one of those delicious pizzas that they have too, as I love pizza and IPA.
Mary, what about you?
So when you said that, my mind went to Germany, because I've been to Germany, but when I was really young, but visited my early 20s, visited some awesome breweries. I don't remember the names of them at this point, but I think Brian and I never had the chance to go to Germany or the Czech Republic together. So I think if we could go to some of those places together through the green door, have some awesome, German lagers and Czech pilsners, that would probably be my choice of where we would go at this. I can't say which places because we would need to decide when we get there. But
thanks for bringing me.
Yeah, thanks for come along. Let's go. Yeah, no, I think the experience there is so uniquely different. And I think we have, we draw a lot of inspiration from those styles of beers, but to actually be able to go together and try them together. And I think that would be kind of, we've talked about it. We just haven't been able to get away from the brewery long enough.
Found the time in the last 6 years.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And I hope you guys get to do that. Both of them. Thanks for taking the time, sharing some insights and being on the show this week.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Questions, comments, guest suggestions, you can email me. It's John Hall. That's JOHNHOLL @allaboutbeer.com, or you can tell me on Twitter @John_Hall. A reminder, you can go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, and read great new content, as well as the archives that go back to 1979. You can also follow All About Beer on social media @AllAboutBeer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, email us at info@allaboutbeer.com or go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Don't forget, All About Beer has a podcast channel now. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. As for the show, Mitch Weber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.